Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the March 27th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, here we go. We're up to 4. We have a work session this evening with that's not as heavy as it has been, although we will be going to executive session. But I would like to open with any announcements. Anybody have any announcements, updates for the public?
Nope. Catch my breath. Hi.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Just a reminder about our emergency shelter. I know that we are on a spring mode, but many people in our village remain homeless before, during, and after spring. So all you have to do is meet in front of Open Door at 9 p.m. and staff member will meet you there. Sorry, rushed up the hill. That goes on to the end of March. So hopefully the board and the nonprofit will have a discussion about what to do with our homeless population from March and October and what our role is. So we'll discuss that soon. But that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, a gentleman approached me today on Spring Street asking for some help in identifying himself as homeless, and he was not familiar with the shelter. In fact, he walked up to me and Supervisor Levenberg. It was an interesting, group of people that he walked up to. Anyway, we asked him to go there at 9 o'clock, and I hoped it was still open. So I'm glad to know that we gave him accurate advice. Thank you. And I will remind folks that as April approaches, we can get ready for exciting things going on celebrating Earth Day. The Ossining Documentary Discussion Series is doing 2 screenings in April. The first will be at our usual time and place, which is 6:30 p.m. at the Ossining Public Library. That's Thursday, April 11th. And that is a special presentation that is involves both Riverkeeper and Ossining High School students who have been doing some studies of the water quality. So it is a short film that is produced by John Bowermaster, who is the documentary filmmaker we have worked with before, who works frequently with Riverkeeper. And then the panelists include Ossining High School students and the Environmental Club coordinator, who is Artie Carlucci, who is an Ossining Environmental Studies science teacher. So I hope you can join us at 6:30 at the Ossining Public Library on April 11th. The following Thursday, we will have a collection of 3 short films from the aforementioned John Bowermaster. Also joining us that evening, in addition, we'll have the filmmaker and the Habitat Restoration Manager for Riverkeeper. And that screening is taking place at 7:30 p.m. And again, it's April 18th, also a Thursday. The series of 3 environmentally related shorts will be screening at Sing Sing Hill Brewery, and a conversation with the filmmaker and the Habitat Restoration Manager will take place there afterwards. So that's 7:30 at Sing Sing Hill Brewery at 75 Spring Street on Thursday, April 18th. And that all leads up to the very exciting biggest Earth Day celebration in Westchester County happening, the Earth Day Festival, it's the 9th annual Earth Day Festival, which is organized entirely by volunteers in Green Ossining. And then as it comes to fruition, we have the support and help of the Recreation and Parks Department's Recreation Department, which serves both the village and the Town Parks Department, and our police department helps out that day, but it's really comes together because of volunteerism, and that is happening on Saturday, April 27th. So to learn more about all of this, you can go to ossiningdocumentaries.org or to greenossining.org. You're just in time if you have any announcements.
I don't.
All right. Well then, Manager McDonald and I had a meeting last week. Was it just last week? With the town and with representatives from Lime, not Lime Bikes, but Lime, to talk about the potential for having this dockless bike sharing opportunity in Ossining. Again, we had a pop-up last September. We learned a lot more about it in this recent meeting. And I didn't realize they've only been around for 18 months, and they are currently, and I don't remember what the number was, but all over the world. They've had an incredible explosion of presence all over the world. And where some other bike sharing companies started off, they're not as available right now. And so we've had some Supervisor Levenberg in particular has done a lot of outreach to other municipalities and given us some of their feedback and their experiences. And we also present at the meeting was Modu from New York State DOT 511 Rideshare. Debbie, what else can you share with folks about what we discussed last week and where we're going with this?
Oh, thank you. It's pretty exciting to think about an opportunity to serve our communities with bikes. We did have a chance to test drive a scooter, which I thought was really fun. They're not really legal in New York yet, so they're not being offered as an alternative, but they are working with our legislators in Albany to see if they can get the law changed to allow for scooters. But they are looking at Austining for a potential permanent solution to bike sharing here in our community. So they are looking at pedal assist and the regular bicycles, and we will be obtaining from them a document that's, an agreement, a legal agreement that we'll begin to review with Stuart Kahn, our Corporation Counsel, to see how we could actually implement Lime bikes in our community. And we've thought a lot about how we could originate them in areas where people would actually come out of their homes and have bikes available so they can get downtown or get to shopping or wherever they need to get. And so we'll be looking at different alternatives. So if members of the public that are listening to this are interested in having some bikes, it'd be good to get some feedback from our community. I know Trustee Bazemore, you used the bikes when they were here last time. And I'm not sure if you have anything that you want to share with them, but I think that our community, because we have a lower amount of cars and it's just another form of transportation for our public to be able to use if we can implement it in our community in the right way. So,
did you want to comment on it?
Not really. Just briefly though, that because I live close to the downtown area, I saw a lot of persons between the community center and say even as further down Spring Street using them, around the park. So, I mean, there are definitely areas of this community. Again, I would say that we know the results because it was mostly piloted in the Market Square area. So, by all means, if there's a thought process to expand it to the general community, that probably will be a great addition as well.
So, a couple of things that came to light while we had this discussion last week. There's the person who's handling our region now is new and wasn't with us as of last September, so this was his first visit to Ossining. As Debbie mentioned, he brought with him that scooter and came to realize it does not succeed in our hills. So those are the kind of things that you can only learn in person. And so he is coming back next Tuesday with some pedal assist bikes, and all of us are invited if you are available to join in with sort of the ride around the area. We had discussions about where does it really make sense, because he said, when the scooters are legal in New York State, would they make sense here? They used them in San Francisco and had great success. But they're not going up the hills in San Francisco. They're just going around in flat areas of San Francisco. And I said, I doubt that Ossining really has big enough flat stretches where it would be all that valuable, other than maybe North State Road. But that's a conversation to have later on. But the pedal assist bikes would definitely make it much more accessible. I was also reassured by some of the discussion about their big picture mission and goals, which is that they're committed to access for everyone. So some of the questions that came up last year that I didn't realize there were this many alternatives. It's an app that you download on your phone. For most of us, we will download the app on our phone. We will then input our driver's license and our credit card. Now, if you do not have a smartphone, a driver's license, or a credit card, that would eliminate you from being able to approach it that way. But it does not eliminate your ability to participate with Lime bikes, because they have places set up in Rite Aids, in various convenience stores, where you can pay cash up front so that you can access the vehicles. And then I don't know exactly how the technology works, but that's part of their goal, is to make sure that regardless of your documentation status, your credit rating, your anything else, any your privacy concerns, you can get access to these bikes, and that's the demographics of the people who use their bikes illustrate that their commitment is really coming to fruition. So I'm pleased to see that, and so all of us are invited to meet. I believe we can follow up with an email and when we confirm it, but I believe we're meeting down at the train station at 5:30, and then they're going to be staying for the town board work session. So if any of us wanted to attend and ask questions, I'm sure that the supervisor would be more than happy to engage us.
So does the town and the village both have to agree to this?
Well,
I mean, like, how do they draw
they,
the
they,
lines?
they, well, that's some of the questions is what happens when you go out of the service line, and they are really working to have it be much more accessible throughout all of Westchester County. They're currently in White Plains. That's their biggest hub in White Plains. I think where it's being utilized a lot, and they have the pedal assist bikes. But we would be one of the early adopters in Westchester if we adopted it. And as far as the village and town is concerned, the town, it wouldn't make any sense for them to do it without the village. And neither board has signed on to it. We're still at the question asking phase. Right?
Right.
Anything that we missed?
Job. Thank
Okay.
you.
So definitely wanted everybody to know about next Tuesday if you're able to join in.
Come try out a bike.
All right.
All right.
So
First on our agenda, Stuart Kahan, 35 Washington Avenue, a license agreement for the retaining wall on public property.
Thank you, Debbie. Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Earlier today, I sent to you a copy of the as-built survey and some photographs of Mr. Mayancella's home at 35 Washington. Portions of his retaining wall, some steps, and the apron leading to his driveway were constructed within the village's right-of-way. They were not on the plans that were submitted to the building department. This was not a planning board approved project because it was a single family home. But as such, he does not have a CO yet because he is encroaching on village property. We have had this in the past with two other properties that I can recall. One was on Bellevue, where the individual wanted to build certain retaining walls, and the other was on Martin Road, if you recall, where he wanted to extend his driveway. In both of those cases, we entered into license agreements with those individuals, which would essentially allow the village to come onto their property, make whatever repairs the village had to make. If it meant that the wall had to come down, the wall would come down, but it would be up to the individual, in this case Mr. Mayancella, to put it back up. I've also today sent you some photographs of the home that he constructed with the walls that are around there. It's not a significant encroachment, but it's an encroachment nonetheless. And it's very clear from the as-built survey that we received that he has come over. He is aware of the encroachment. He was told about it by his architect as well as by the building department. So what I would like to do is similar as we've done with the two other cases, is to have him enter into a license agreement with the village, which would basically give the village rights, obviously, over its own property and other maintenance obligations to be imposed upon Mr. Mayancella with regard to those particular areas. Again, it's something we've done in the past. Trustee Quezada reminded me, and it is accurate, that on this portion of Washington Avenue, there are no other homes with retaining walls like that. This is the only one. If you were on that side and you looked at it, you would see it. But it does come within our village's right-of-way on a number of points that are clear from the survey. And if one were to look at the photographs, you could see where he's coming across. So my request to the board is that we be able to present a license agreement. I have Mr. Mayancella, in fact, coming into the office tomorrow to discuss it with him, and then that the board could approve a license agreement, which could be executed by the village manager and would essentially run with the land so that preserving the village's rights over its own property. The reason this does not go to the zoning board is that the zoning board cannot grant a variance over village-owned property. If this was someone else's property or if it was just a setback issue, they could, in fact, grant the variance, but there's no variance to be granted over village-owned property. So that's why the route would be the license agreement for Mr. Mayancella.
How much is it on village property?
It's a couple of feet.
Really?
At some points, it's a few inches. It goes on a little bit of an angle. It's not a large thing. Most of the sidewalk is open, but it's a couple of inches at some point. If I had a slide rule, I can give you the exact measurement, but you can see it from the survey that he's definitely encroached upon the villages, particularly where he put his stairs in, is over the property line.
And when was this done? It's completed, right?
It's all finished.
Yeah, when?
In 2018,
Last year.
yes.
The house looks lovely.
What?
The house
is
looks
beautiful.
lovely. And there are a number of houses in that block that would really benefit from this kind of attention and investment. I know that the person who did all of his drawings does a lot of work in Austin. I'm surprised that nobody thought to check the survey before they did this major stonework.
If I can, I've spoken with the architect. The plans that were submitted to the building department do not include the retaining walls, the stairs. They were, because the architect was aware of what the property lines were, but they were not, they were put in, my understanding is they were put in by the owner as part of the work that was done. It was not something that was through the architect.
When you said we've done this before, didn't we do this before? Because it wasn't like after the fact and a recent fact, right?
In the other two cases that I'm familiar with, the two parties came to the village before they did the work.
Right.
55 Bellevue, he was planning to build retaining walls to increase the area for his driveway. And on Martin, he came to us because he was going to be encroaching on the village's right-of-way in order to expand his driveway. So in both of those, it was both were done pre-construction. That is correct.
Which means we would have had the opportunity to say no and nothing would have happened. And here, it happened last year and we're being asked to do something after it was just recently completed without being asked for in advance for permission.
You are correct.
And so we'll vote on this maybe next week?
Well, would I do be a resolution to allow the village manager to execute a license agreement? Correct.
All right.
I'm just curious why we would do that. I mean, we set precedents every time we agree to something. It's one thing if an old building, it's another if water drainage happens, it's a third if, hey, it was done in 1927, who even knew? It was just done. It's done by a person that's done work in this village and should have known. I mean, these are
I don't know if
professionals.
Mr. Mayancella has ever done work in the village.
That's a fair point.
The architect does,
But he's a contractor who now lives in the village.
he now lives in that house, correct?
Yeah, so the next 20 people that come in here after they encroach on property, I mean, we've had other encroachment issues. We're going to have to say yes to all of them now. I mean, legally we don't have to, but I'm really uncomfortable. I'm never uncomfortable when you build an old house or there is a natural issue. If I don't do it this way, the car can't fit into my driveway, the earth has moved. I mean, something that's environmental. I'm just feeling really uncomfortable. It's a beautiful house. I wish all the houses in our community looked like that, including mine. It's gorgeous. But there's something that feels really awkward about being asked for something after you've already built everything on someone else's property, in this case the village. It's not your property. I can't really say that he knew he was doing something he shouldn't because I have no proof of that, but it feels really unusual in 2018 rather than way in the past. And it doesn't look to me like it had to be done that way. I don't see an environmental issue that it had to have been done on village property this way, unless I'm wrong.
Now, let me give you a comparable situation.
Okay.
Which is in fact very current. The three garages that were built across the street at 25 Croton, which is where they had the collapse and then they put the three garages back there right across the street. When those garages were constructed, they were 16 inches onto village property in the back. They were not provided with a CO. They were also about 5 inches onto the adjoining property. And in order to get the CO, they essentially cut off the portion of the back of the building, which they did.
I remember that. That's why this feels.
Pointing out that was done. I'm again, the same argument could be made to Mr. Mayansella. I just am presenting it to the board, and it's how the board wants to do it. We did have that circumstance, as I said, with 25 Croton, where the owner was, in fact, to get his CO, he had to take off a portion of the building because there, when they put the prefab foundation, wasn't a perfect square, so it actually overlapped by 16 inches.
It's, for me, a slippery slope.
I understand.
Like 8 inches for this guy, and I need 2 feet from my driveway, then 6 feet into this brow. I mean, once we say yes to people, it's.
I'm merely presenting it to you folks.
I got it.
Well, you know, unfortunately, there are some members of our community that have the mindset of, and they have stated this openly, it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. And so we don't want to essentially open the door for that to become an acceptable norm. In this case, I think it was probably ignorance, not that that's any excuse for the law. So the question is, do we just say, you know, he made a mistake. The outcome of it, the sidewalk is as wide as we need it to be anyway, right? It seems to be, the sidewalk from the photos I can see seems to be in decent condition. It's the proper width. We're not actually saying we need that space for anything other than the fact that it is village-owned property, so it should not have staircases and a wall and the lovely decorative lighting on the top of the turrets that he has there. It's really quite elaborate. But what we're saying is, what Rika's saying is, we don't want to have just an accepted practice that you can go ahead, make mistakes, not follow the rules, and then we'll just draw up a piece of paper saying no harm, no foul. If we need you to get out of the way in the future, you can get out of the way in the future with no penalty.
What would be the penalty?
That's what I'm asking. Is there some, that's my next question. Is there some sort of penalty that could be imposed? Is there any sort of more than just an acknowledgement that you made a mistake, and if it becomes an issue in the future, you'll have to pay for the correction?
In the other two matters, we did not impose a fee on the property owners to encroach.
Right, because they asked permission before they did it.
Correct, but so we don't have an experience with basically saying, you know, how much
An
is that
encroachment
particular-
fee.
Well, the fact is, with regard to 25 Croton, there was at one time a very preliminary discussion that if they wanted to purchase essentially the 16 inches of the village property, and what would it be worth? And you'd have to basically figure that out. You know, you'd go up and talk to your assessor and figure out what it would have to be. There is, you know, there'd be a way to calculate that. This agreement does not include a charge to him. It basically just gives us as what our rights are anyway, but that if, you know, if we had to take it down, he has to take it down, but he has to obviously maintain his walls and maintain the stairs and do everything like that. It doesn't become, you know, our responsibility. But I do understand the board's concern. I do not know whether he was aware of what his survey was or not. I just simply don't know. I do know that it was recognized by the building department when they went to do an inspection, and it was recognized that it was inconsistent with the survey. And that's why currently he does not have a certificate of occupancy for his house.
Further thoughts and questions on how we should proceed, what this agreement should or shouldn't address?
I think he should be charged for this with a fine that we have to figure out how to do. And it can't be a couple of bucks. I really don't want to sit here and have people do stuff. It totally defies what you're supposed to do. It's recent. He put plans in for other things, just not this thing. I don't know him. I don't know. I see the pictures of the house. I've no history here. I just am really concerned about people doing things and then just pleading ignorance.
I don't know if I necessarily agree with the fine. I definitely understand the sentiments. However, I guess my thought is that once you present it next week, you present the resolution. It'll either pass or fail, and then we'll take it from there.
And I'll also talk to him tomorrow. You know,
You don't have to do it that way.
Well, the thing is, the resolution is just going to say to allow the manager to enter into a contract. So what we're deciding now is what should that contract say? Right now, the contract doesn't have any financial implications other than the potential if it
Correct.
needs to be
We
taken
can
down in
have
the future.
options or consideration, right? So one could be the proposed fine from trustee Levin, or um, the assessment, so how much it would cost them to actually purchase the property if the board chooses to sell whatever amount of property was taken, or I'm just saying, giving actually having options.
What is the fine for building without a permit?
It's,
CO.
it's $1,000 or 3 times the cost of the permit, whichever is greater. It's generally $1,000 because most
Oh, there you go.
most permits don't come at.
So this was
Sounds good.
technically for what I've been hearing so far. Even just let me go back. I agree with everything. The majority of what the rest of the board has said. I like the house. I drive by there
Beautiful.
almost every day. The wall is a really nice work as well as the stonework itself. I do agree with Rika because there's been a couple other entities that have built in our property, and we haven't gone this far, I guess. But I think we need to put a line into the sand at the same time. So that's the reason why I'm asking, because we do have in our books, if you build something without a permit, there's a fine. In this particular case, this was not part of the site plan because there wasn't a really site plan. It was just an architectural review board approval. So it wasn't really a site plan needed. So there wasn't a need to put or present a site plan for review.
Oh.
So could you please find out how much would that be?
Well, actually, let me correct something.
Sure.
If you do work without a permit and then have to get a permit, it's $1,000. However, if you receive an order to remedy and an appearance ticket for a violation of, I think it's 270-43, where you don't have a building permit, that's a max fine of up to $1,500 under the village code. And in fact, under the state code, it's even higher.
So that this would more qualify as what you just described.
Right. In other words, if you actually do something without a building permit and you're written up by the building department, the fine for that, in addition to just getting a building permit, but the actual fine that the village can impose under its code is $1,500.
That's if you take that person to court.
If you were to, that's right. If you go to court and get the max fine, it would be $1,500. That's correct.
But we're not suggesting that they're going to then go get a building permit for this because that wouldn't necessarily be appropriate here, would it?
No, he's already
So
had.
we would
he already
never,
had
but we would never,
We're
we
not
would
asking for
no,
that.
we would not retroactively grant a building permit for this to be allowable, would we?
Well, to legalize that wall in a way,
Well,
or to legalize anything, you have to get a building permit if you build something without a permit.
that's correct. But
If this has been on his property, though, it wouldn't have been
but
us.
you're really not, in a sense, legalizing it here.
Correct.
Because one, he had a building permit, although not obviously
for
for this. And two, it's not a situation where, as I said before, he can go to a zoning board and get himself a variance. But the building department, if it wanted to, he could get a violation for failing to basically build in accord with his permit, which is basically a violation of the code anyway, and the max fine is $1,500 if found guilty. I should point that out.
Yeah.
So, that requires that, but that's the max fine under the village code.
So it has to go to court before the fine can be imposed?
Well,
Can he just agree to pay it?
if he agreed to pay it, then one does not have to go to court at all, correct? He could simply, we'll say, the fine for what you did is X, and if you agree to pay that, we can enter into this agreement or something. That's one possibility, but that would be the max fine under the village code.
You're meeting with him tomorrow.
Yes, I am.
So you're proposing just a license agreement that would technically legalize it, but it wouldn't legalize it, but it would just give us cover because he's on our property.
Yeah, I want to be clear. What it would do is it would
It would allow it.
give him an ability to do it, correct? But hearing the sense of the board, I certainly can propose a few things to him. One, the most extreme is cut it back, basically to your property line. That may not at all be possible. I don't know. The other possibility is that you impose a fine on him. what it would be for doing it without a permit, which would, as I said, be $1,500 under village code.
Is there a reason the building department decided not to go through the process of issuing, I guess, OTR?
I think I don't know the specific answer to that. I do know he doesn't have a certificate of occupancy as of yet, which is critical for him if he wanted to sell it or do anything with regard to the house. He has, from what I understand, passed all his inspections, but because he's not within the property line, we will not give him the CO and won't give it to him until it's under a license agreement or he puts the property back within his the four corners of his property line.
If he gets charged with a violation of up to $1,500 and agrees to pay that, can there also be a license agreement which is how we started this conversation? So
Well, that was my
he would
suggestion,
still need-
actually.
He would still, I apologize, he would still need the license agreement because
Excellent.
he would still be
That was my
within
suggestion.
our property.
And I still think that's cheap, because if he had to redo that whole thing, I'm guessing it's more than $1,500 to take that whole thing down and redo it. It's the principle of a community and how one does not selectively go onto someone else's property. We had that with the trees with the guy who said he didn't know it was anybody's property and then knocked everything down, and it just can't.
There was no
be like
fine imposed into that particular
No,
application.
for the trees there was. There was actually a formula that was used, I
I don't
believe.
remember.
Should have
I
been.
was part of the board. I don't remember
No,
that
we
person
didn't-
having a fine.
He was supposed to pay for all the trees.
okay, now we're getting a little off topic. Let's
Yeah,
we
we
can,
are.
we can look
I'm
into
I'm
the,
talking about more of like precedents. I'm not talking about this.
Discuss it. I'll meet with Mr. Mayancella
Just-
tomorrow.
Just to be clear, I want to learn about all the options. So the fine, the licensing agreement, and also what it's actually valued if we were to consider a sale. So those three.
Okay, that I'll see if I can get information from the assessor with regard to that, as to what that might be.
We're talking about maybe like, I don't know. Have you seen the survey?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's just. I'll
Is
let
there-
Stuart
Is
find out.
there
how
a
much.
reason why? Because when I look at my survey, it's the same thing, and the retaining walls on my property are set back from what looks like the property line, which is the sidewalk, and I trust that we did it properly because we looked at the survey when we did the work that we did. Why did municipalities do that? Because I don't actually own the property, but it looks like I do.
You own up to your property. You own up to your property.
But I maintain the sidewalk and up to the sidewalk line. So everybody assumes that that's their property if they've got flowers growing there and it's not a sidewalk.
Well, if you recall, last year, I think it was the year before, we amended the village code so that you're responsible now for cleaning the area up to
The curb, yes.
Before people thought that it basically stopped at the sidewalk.
Part of my understanding is, and maybe Paul could, at some point could clarify this, but there's obviously parts of our village and other municipalities where you don't have sidewalks, sure. And part of, you have, that's what we're discussing earlier today, there's a buffer between your property line and the village line, which is about 10 feet, take or give in some municipalities. And there have utilities underneath that area. So that's part of what, that's the reason why a lot of the stuff is maintained by the municipality, because they have, even though it looks like your property, it's not really your property.
Utilities tend to always be in the street because they're always cutting up the street.
Correct. So part of that's one of the reasons. But again, probably is a lot more to it, and I'll leave that for the engineers. And some of the stuff, like I said, is just irrelevant to what we.
The reason why I ask that now is because if do we want to be, as we find out what the cost would be, what the assessed value would be if we want to actually sell that property, is there a reason more broadly that I'm not aware of why we wouldn't want to sell that property? Because I'm not sure why we always maintain ownership within the sidewalk. So
That would also be a question going to what Trustee Cazada was saying as to what infrastructure, if any, is nearby or under there. That was the situation we had with Bellevue,
Yeah,
because
that's
there
right.
were water lines
Mhm.
nearby, so that was a concern that was there. They don't show up here on this survey, but that does not mean that there isn't something nearby.
Just to keep in mind that it's, if we're gonna, we definitely have that in the front of our properties in a lot of municipalities, in a lot of our streets, but there's also utility stuff that belongs to the community itself, I guess, in the rear of properties as well. As there's some in State Street. So what do we do with that? Do we, so it's like, do we maintain that or we sell them back? But we need access to those things. You know, there's one property on Hunter Street that belongs to us that we have infrastructure right in the middle of it, and it's empty. But you know, so there's a lot more complexity of what.
I have
Just
no
in
doubt
front
that
of
there's
you.
complexity. I just think on this situation, if we're going to look at precedent, then we should not create more and more precedent that people, whether it's 2 inches or 2 feet, build on property that isn't theirs. When people own houses, they have some responsibility to do some homework before they spend what I assume looks like thousands of dollars of work was done here. Some thought went into it because that's beautiful. Takes a lot of time and effort. So I don't want people coming in, neighbors saying, "Well, they went this way, and I went." It's. I'm not trying to make it complicated. I'm fine with the fine. I think Omar wants more homework on it, but until then, I think it's sounds like a no on allowing this to go forward without these 2 steps. Is that what we're saying, or
I don't think
people
we're
in
ready to vote
disagreement?
on a license agreement for next week until we have
Yeah, 'cause
greater
we're still
clarity
waiting to
on
hear
some other aspects.
Option, to educate ourselves on the value.
And it's not like he's, it's built. He doesn't have a
Not
crew
going
standing
anywhere.
by to do work unless
Right.
it's going to be to knock it down. So
right.
we can give ourselves another week to figure it out.
Thank
Okay.
you, I will.
All right, so moving on. We had this nice short agenda.
That's what I do.
Yes, Stuart, thank you.
Next is hopefully a little bit simpler. As part of the new water treatment plant construction, we are going to need a construction easement from General Electric to get across a portion of their property. And they have provided me with a form access agreement that they have proposed. The area of the easement is approximately, and I believe I sent you maps earlier today, it's about 8,000 square feet. There will be temporary fences set up. It will be used, there will be one pole there for certain utilities. There will be some piping there for water. It will be maintained, and then it will be restored back to what it was before once the construction is completed. GE has was very open. It was is so far been very easy to deal with. We have a few issues with regard to the type of insurance that's required, and they have agreed to waive certain of the requirements that relate to environmental remediation, because this is not an environmental project that we're doing with regard to the GE property. And what I'd be asking the board is for authorization for the village manager to enter into this access agreement. It is good for 3 years and then can be extended an additional 3 months. The village is not being asked to pay anything to General Electric for purpose of the access. We just will have to provide insurance, which will name General Electric as an additional insured with regard to the work that's being done, as well as with regard to the work that's being done by the contractors on site.
So we're empowering the manager to sign an agreement that helps us and costs us nothing. Excellent. All right. I don't have any questions. Any
I
questions?
mean, this is just temporary, sure, or this is going to be.
For construction.
Yeah, they're
Yeah,
not
that's
letting
what
us
I'm
just take some of their
Just
property.
asking, you never know.
That'd be nice.
3 years at the most. 3 years, 3 months at the most, if necessary.
Great.
Unfortunately, it doesn't come with a clubhouse pass. All right. Next on the agenda is minor modifications to downtown parking. So I sent you some maps of Central Avenue, St. Paul Street, Academy Street, and there have been many people who have called my office, talked to me about lack of overnight parking, people having parking exemptions and not being able to find a place to park. And also quite a few of the businesses have relayed to me a concern over where they park as employees, and how can we help solve that problem. So I want to actually say thank you to Johnny G from the Chamber. He took me last Friday and introduced me to all the businesses from Highland Avenue on Main all the way down to Spring Street. And that was a lot. And it was really exciting to meet a lot of the businesses, but I asked them about parking meters, what are their struggles, what do they find? And I got some really, really good feedback. All of them were supportive of finding places for us to allow full-time day parking in areas. And the businesses weren't so concerned with the overnight parking or the exemption parking because that's not really the height of where they are when they're working. But they did make some suggestions. One of the suggestions that I heard was, and I didn't put it on the topic, but it was the Market Square parking lot as well. Maybe adding a few extra spots there for daytime parking. So the recommendation really is to look at Central Avenue. There's 2-hour parking as you go past the electric supply house. And there's hardly ever, if anybody, ever parking there. So
Upper or lower? Central.
the upper,
Okay.
upper, but not in the area where the meters are, because we really need those spaces to turn over because there are some business parking, some short-term parking needs in the very top of the hill. But after you get past the firehouse, then there's 2-hour parking. Rarely is there anybody there. So the thought was, would the board support changing that from 2-hour to daytime permit parking? And that would free up the spaces where people are parking in the main areas around Market Square and the central business district to park back in there and walk to work and not have to keep going out and moving their cars. And that would open up some spaces in there. That's for the daytime part. The St. Paul and Academy Street, we're looking really at overnight parking exemption. Right now, there are no signs on Academy Street.
Academy Place.
Pardon?
It's Academy Place and St. Paul's Place. Sorry, just
All right,
almost
thank you.
needles me when you say it.
Okay. On Academy.
That works.
There we go. So is that a place where the trustees would support allowing daytime parking and overnight exemption parking? People do park there now, but there's no signage, so there's no limitations for when they park and how often. So there's no real enforcement on that street. St. Paul's, there's no overnight parking. There are parking spots available for the daytime parking. So it's just a proposal because we are looking for some additional spaces. I reached out to engineering, talked to Paul, and I sent you the email correspondence that we had going back and forth. I also talked with the police chief to see if there was any reason or some back history as to why those streets were labeled the way they are. So the street department is concerned about snow removal and street cleaning. So that's something that we need to consider. Yes.
On that note, couldn't we just add that to the snow emergency route? So
We possibly could. Sure.
that's an easy fix, right? I mean,
Right. And it doesn't snow that much here.
yeah.
I think our parking needs probably outweigh some of that. But yeah, we could definitely add that to the list if that's your recommendation.
Just, that's a
I'm just
pretty-
looking for some additional places where the employees can park during the day and some of the overnight exemption parkings can be expanded.
The maps, maybe I missed it, because I was looking at this morning.
Uh-huh. Which one are you
Did you
looking
include, no, did you include the parking area up in Waller Street?
at? No, I didn't because that's available for permit parking. It's just not as used as heavily. I have recommended that to every business that I've met with so far, saying, that's an available spot. It does seem to be too far for some of the people to
Well, if
park
we're
up
gonna-
there.
But again, if we rearrange it, sure, one of your suggestions was Central Ave, sure, and have that as a, more like a permanent for employees.
Daytime parking.
Daytime parking.
Daytime permit.
So to me, sort of the same concept.
Mhm.
Have them walk an extra block. I mean, it's
To Waller.
to to allow some overflow parking and allow some of the parts in there. I agree with Omar in regards to having those two streets be added to the emergency snow removal part. And we also could be the alternate size, obviously, like we
Right.
have not in other ones. It doesn't have to be both sides like we have that, at least in
Alternate overnight, right?
overnight. Correct.
Right.
On St. Paul's and
And St.
Academy.
Paul's and Academy. Now, I'm curious to see. I mean, it would have been helpful to have the engineer here or police chief to get some additional feedback on that. I wasn't sure. Besides the emails, were there other different conversations that you two had in regards to the overnight parking or any parking at all?
Well, based on what the feedback that I got, the engineer was concerned mostly about the snow removal and street cleaning. I mean, there wasn't more conversation that was really needed about that.
I'm looking at Central because Academy and St. Paul's makes a lot of sense to me to do alternate side overnight parking and yeah, right. St. Paul's is one way, and it already. I mean, it's even St. Paul's makes a lot of sense. Academy right now is just unsigned, and I know it does get utilized a lot for daytime parking, but there's no limit on it right now. It's just unreserved daytime parking. With no overnight parking. Really, what we're doing is we're creating overnight parking
Correct. On St. Paul's.
on Academy. I mean, but I mean on both. But the existing regulations on St. Paul are what? Nothing. But the thing is, it's lined for parking.
It is lined for parking.
It's not 2 or 3 hour for anybody. It's not tag.
I think it's 2 hours.
It's 2 hours. Okay, because
2 hour
Academy
parking.
is not.
Correct.
Academy just has
It's not signed
just
at all.
Wild Wild West. You just show up,
Correct.
but you better not be there between 3 and 6 a.m.
Right.
And I don't know how much ticketing is an issue there, but what we would be creating for the people who live in that area is they could have overnight parking, but only on one side of the street or the other. And I think the benefit for that is when the street sweeper comes through, some days he'll get one side, some days he'll get the other side when it's all clear because he comes through sort of the tail end of that 3 to 6 a.m.
Right.
Slot. Central Avenue is a little less clear to me how much we're getting out of it and how much parking is there because there's 2 firehouses. So that takes away a lot of the parking. I mean, essentially from what I'm seeing on this map, there's the meters up on top there by the Opera House
Correct.
end. And that's on the north side of the street. I don't know if there's any parking on the south side
There
of the
is
street,
not.
which is the inside of the curve. So
There's not.
there still wouldn't be then. So then you're talking about, maybe 3 or 4 cars that could park on the downhill side of the north side of Central Avenue between the 2 firehouse areas
Well, no,
there.
I'm actually looking at beyond where the firehouse
Down-
and the
down to
electric
the kid.
company is. And
Oh,
there
okay.
is-
That's not actually on this map.
No, it's not.
it's
okay.
it's really hard to see, but there are
I mean, the map ends at the firehouse.
there are parking areas
Yes.
beyond that,
Right.
and it says
Up
2
to the
hour.
Sing
No one
Sing
ever
Pilgrimage.
parks there.
Okay. By where the crosswalk is and
But
such.
part
yeah.
of that, for some reason, I thought, and could be wrong, but wasn't it that train station parking spaces?
So at the bottom of the hill, on your way up the hill, that says train station. I'm not proposing that we change that at all.
So you want to keep the same spots, just the
Yes.
additional the overflow, so to speak, additional of that, make that up. Okay.
Instead of
Upper
2
Central.
hours, make it daytime permit parking.
So I would be supportive of your changes. My only question is, are we moving to the parking analysis?
We are,
Oh,
yes. So we're looking at some different companies. I now have 4 that I can reach out to. And I want to be very specific about what I'm asking them for because I don't want to recreate anything that we've already done. So we have several old parking studies.
Mhm.
I don't want to redo that. So what I'm looking for really is an analysis of as this board considers removing parking areas and rebuilding our downtown, where will we be able to put parking? And then what should our pricing structure be? Because we've talked about it being a little more expensive to be real close and a lot less expensive to be in lots that are further away.
Mhm.
And then hopefully they can also give us some recommendations on where other locations might be that we could create some parking.
might I suggest, just a thought, because the Waller Avenue lot is so underutilized, maybe just some mere signage for
That's a
people.
great idea. It might not be that people know that it's there.
Yeah.
So when we talk about doing the parking analysis, are we just talking to vendors who would then sell us a parking system?
No,
It's parking strategy, isn't it, as well?
no, it would be an engineering firm that does parking analysis and which would create the strategy. And then from there, we would be able to decide what equipment we needed
Like what tools?
to do what we needed to do.
Great. Okay. That's not where I thought your head was at a couple weeks ago, but okay.
Yeah, it's changed.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind. Okay, we just changed.
I'd
course.
rather
That's
know where
great.
we wanted to do it
I-
and come up with
I think it's a
you
good
know,
approach.
long-term strategy because I think rebuilding that downtown is a perfect solution for us, but we do have to be concerned about where parking is going to go.
So can I also suggest though that when people walk the Sing Sing, on that walkway, especially with the construction, you're scaring me.
Except the tippy
I
chair.
think I had that chair today.
Oh.
Threatening
Um,
to throw out that chair, but
That we have to be careful about a few things, like when people want to do that walk. It's hard now to park in a community center, A, because it's such a used community center, and B, because of the construction. I suspect that people use this as well, where we're talking about, full day permits to park there, even if it's 2 or 3 cars, but we're sort of closing in on people's ability to park their car and walk. And if they have kids with the strollers or somebody, who needs a little help, like that's pretty close to being able to walk to that area. So I would just also
so
look at that as a possibility. Also, I thought that one of the I'm fine with everything. I just a little bit of thought into. I appreciate all the employees who don't want to walk too far to their jobs. There is not a river town. There's not a town in Westchester County near a downtown where parking is not an issue and where employees don't have to walk a little bit to get, when they're parked all day long. And commuters who don't want to pay the commuter fee or the whatever fee who start encroaching. So, it's a finite set of assets.
Sure.
There's no right or wrong.
Right.
Maybe commuters should be able to, maybe we don't need spots for the people who want to walk, but, maybe employees should be taken care of so they don't have to walk in the rain because they're working there every day. Maybe the shoppers should be, but this is the reason you do studies.
right.
But sometimes when we jump like this popcorn thing, it pops over here, so we all run over there, and then it pops over here, and we all run over here. You gotta look at the whole thing and say, I appreciate that retailers want to do this and the commuters want to do that, but I do think that you have to look at everybody that uses it, because part of the parking strategy and payment for it is actually a strategy of how to manage human traffic. As terrible as that just sounded as I said it,
Yeah.
and all the other things it
understand. We
means.
understand.
But there might be. We also need space where the reason we do 2 or 3 hours is, in fact, so commuters don't park there all day or employees don't just park. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
So.
I'm sorry,
No,
yeah.
no, I'm good with what
Yeah,
you were saying.
yeah.
I just
So
want to
is it
look
safe-
at.
is
That's
it- is
all.
it- Is it safe to say that this is like something that is, temporary, but once you do the strategy and you get the parking
It may
analysis,
change.
it may change.
It may
Okay.
change.
Or the plan.
It's a
Now,
temporary-
the comprehensive plan may look at it. I don't think it's necessarily parking, but it may look at use of areas and what they're being used for. But then, a year or 2 down the road, so temporary is also, who knows what that means.
So what will you need from us? Will we
For
have
next
to pass a
week.
resolution or?
No, actually, no. The procedure that is, because Debbie has been given the authority by the board to do this,
Mhm.
is that we need to publish it in the Gazette, the changes that we're going to make. It gets filed with the clerk. It becomes effective in 30 days unless the village manager deems it an emergency situation. If someone in that 30-day window comes to the board, or the board on its own motion believes it's incorrect, they can essentially suspend or revoke the change. So the authority is given to the manager, with the board having the ability to basically put the brakes on it, so to speak.
But-
So we don't have to pass a resolution because
Not-
and based on our email, that's what I thought it was.
No resolution is
Just keep in
required.
mind,
But-
we changed the law
Right.
about 4 years ago.
2016.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It used to be a code. We used to have to a code change. It was a law. So it's definitely streamlined. But I thought there was still a resolution that we passed.
No, what it is you simply have to publish as traffic rules and regulations in the official newspaper, file it with the village clerk, and they become effective not less than 30 days after publication, unless there's an emergency, in which event it can go quicker, or if someone opposes it, and then the board can suspend or revoke.
But
think
you're doing right. You're doing overnight. People are going to be paying for something. Yes. Okay, so it's not like we could just change it because people just paid for something, and they're not going to be happy if you just decided, oh, not working for us after 6 months. Because aren't they paying for a longer period of
With
time?
overnight parking, now you'll be able to park in 30 days from now, pretty much
Mhm.
able to
Or
park in
day.
Academy
You pay for
or,
either.
yeah.
Right.
My whole premise of temporary was we would eventually do a parking analysis.
No, I know what you meant by temporary. I'm now using it. I understand I switched it on you. But I'm just, once we make this available, people are going to be paying for something. So we got to make sure we get
Some of
this
them are,
right.
but
Yeah,
some
they're
of them
already-
are
yeah.
already.
They're already paying for
So this will just
permits.
open up
It's
the
just
number
that's
of spaces available, and we have to put the signs up,
correct.
especially where there are no
My
signs.
concern, regardless of how this happens, again, is because we do have a police department,
Mhm.
they do the enforcement, and
Yes.
we do have a village engineer. So
Yes.
make sure all those are being communicated within each other, regardless of what the study.
Oh, they are.
When their study happens.
Yeah, but the email thread. Thank you for forwarding to us the email thread. It was. I'd like to see a detailed clarification of everything that we discussed tonight, and then I'd like to
In
have some
writing.
feedback from the department heads that would from the essentially the engineer and the police chief.
If you'd like, before we get it out for publication, I'll send you what it's going to look like. So in
Right.
terms of, so that we're
There we
all
go.
on the same
Right.
page in terms of.
Well, we'd like a proposal, goal, stuff that's happening, the delineation, the streets, and we'd like the commentary.
Now, for
from
me, it's
people
just gonna
involved.
be, I mean, from my perspective, because what's going to get published is just basically, it's a new traffic rule and regulation. That, on Academy, you're going to be allowing this, on alternate days, you're going to be allowing that. And the code also provides that the village engineer, and then we put the necessary
Right.
signage up, so that the signs will go up, so that people will know where those spaces
Uh,
are available.
I would say I would actually be curious to know, with respects to Academy Place, how many, when it comes to enforcement, how many tickets have actually been thrown out because there is no sign, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would also be curious to know, are we actually creating spots, or have people been parking there, and then if they go to the court, it's thrown out because there's no signage?
I don't think they're getting tickets
Okay.
because there's no regulation there.
Okay.
So I think sometimes we walk away from a meeting and 6 of us sat at the table and 6 of us walk away with a different perception of what was said. So not only before the public notice is sent out, but please send it to us as a proposal expressing what the two of you recognize as what's being recommended, and circulate it to the board and to the other departments that are most relevant.
Will do.
And if I may, I email chains just don't work for me because they feel like I'm entering into middle of conversations without context. I would like the chief of police and the engineer to comment and say that it's okay, or they have a problem or don't have a problem, specifically to what is being written as an understanding of this conversation. Because email chains, I just, to me, is middle of conversations. And so one piece of paper and commentary on it, and one paragraph says, yeah, I don't see a problem. Well, yeah, there is a problem, if you do it on this way or that way. And I think you said you wanted that alternate street thing added in there?
This is an
As a
emergency.
plan. It's no emergency, so that should be added, right? And I'm sure that Stuart
Yeah,
got
those
that.
are yeah,
The-
the one.
And did you mention the alternate? I mean, because that should all be written out for people, so there's an understanding and an intent and the goal of this. And it's not a long write-up, talking about short and to the point.
And a clarification also on Central Avenue, exactly. I know we have the overhead, so it doesn't actually show where the parking change would be. So,
I think probably
some highlighting of exactly where we're talking
get a
about.
better map.
Yeah.
part of that, I think, is more like I saw the maps, which is great. But what are we gaining? How many spots are we gaining? And I agree with Rika. There are people that used to kill to that side of Central to enter the kill. So maybe 1 or 2 spots, depending on how
Couple
many
of
we
spots.
have, that could be reserved.
So here's on St. Paul's Place, you have 9 spots on one side and 8 spots on the other. If you do alternate parking, then you're only actually adding 8 or 9 spaces. You're not actually adding.
For overnight.
17, correct.
So if that's the intent,
Oh, that's alternate side, but if
If
you
you're
do the
gonna do
snow,
alternate
then you're
side-
doing 17, except when it snows, when it's
The,
reached
the
0.
alternate side, if
Yeah.
we don't have alternate side overnight parking, then that street never gets swept.
Or when is the street like?
How is it
yes.
set now?
they have to be gone by
There is no
They're not allowed to
cost.
be there
There's
between
no-
3 and
Or
6
is it like certain
Okay,
days?
so they are swept.
Like, is it like a
certain days.
so?
So if
What, you mean the alternate side?
Like I'm saying, like
For
if
sweeping.
so, like if
Again, those are questions for the engineer.
well, that's my
Well,
question
Well,
for you.
I mean,
Well,
it's a philosophical discussion. If we either allow it on one side and then do alternate parking, or we allow it on both, and then the engineer can come in with the street sweeper after 6 a.m. If we're not going to do,
Are you talking about
Daytime
like in
permitting.
the city, the way they put up these signs that say, you know, on Tuesdays until
Right.
12,
So-
no parking here?
so again, it's
For
not
that reason.
It's not. It's for me, it's not important that we get. My goal is to see how we can create as many spots as possible with making sure that the snow gets removed and the
Right.
street gets clean. So if there is a hodgepodge of different ideas, whether it could be like they do in the city, hey, like this day or between this time, we're
Right.
going to do street sweeping,
can't park here till
or
10.
you can't, or something. But all I'm saying is I think you and Paul and everybody can work that out.
Right.
Yeah.
And Academy Place is the same. You got 10 spots on both sides. So if we do alternate, you're only adding 10 spots. If you do both
Right now-
sides, it's 20.
But right now, there's no overnight parking allowed on either of those streets, so we'd be
Correct.
going from 0 to,
To
to
19.
18 or 19.
It's great, actually.
Yeah. So
Even
it's
if we
up
just
to
do
you.
alternate, that's significant.
Thank you for this. Even though it's temporary, and I'm glad that Trustee Bazemore kind of assured that we tie this into the overall comprehensive parking analysis. It's still going to be impacting people that have been devastated by parking, especially in that area. Not just the one case that we heard from the board in an email, but I mean, as a person who's actually rented commercial space in Austin in the past 20 years and been a resident in downtown for the past 6 years, I want to know who wrote our parking regulations in general. I'm glad that that's moving forward, and that even though this is a temporary fix, it's more progress that has been made to address real issues when it comes to parking in that area than we've had in a while. As far as the department heads, clearly the board feels that they don't, from my understanding, they don't feel that they have the right feedback and or approval from the department heads, regardless of what you say in your email or what you say here. So I think that we need to bring them in, have a discussion about, your recommendations in that process. And this kind of like, because I kind of feel like, I'm kind of like sending you back to your department heads when you really said you spoke to them. So I want to make sure that we're not wasting your time or department heads' times, because I was pretty good with your email thread.
So
But,
I guess I am not sure that I'm clear on this, because the police department said it was fine and the engineer said it was
No, I'm agreeing
fine.
with you.
But you want me to bring them in so that you can
They asked
hear
you to
them
bring them.
say?
No,
I,
that's
I,
It's
I, don't, I
fine.
don't think
I
the
guess
email thread
I'm-
was nearly as thorough as this conversation.
no. That's why I'm bringing it up, because that's what I've heard at the meeting. So I want to make sure we discuss it.
Okay.
So what I will say is for me, is however you create the most spots for me at the end of the day,
I'm supportive of
that's
this,
what's
by the way.
important.
I just am sharing.
I'm going to rephrase that a little bit different, I guess, Omar, because the concern that I have is, so we're creating laws, or this is what this body does, create laws from which we hope, and we try to make sure that any other department that we create stuff does that's the implementation of this. So by us modifying the parking areas on these 3 different sections of our village, part of that falls obviously in our engineer, DPW, and obviously our police department. So to me, I want to make sure our department heads, as you call it, we are all on the same page. To me, the detail stuff, I agree with Debbie, I think is helpful, but we are discussing other stuff in here. So I want to make sure there are questions that probably Paul could answer, some of the stuff that we had in mind here, probably the stuff that the chief would be able to answer. Like, you know what? That's not really practical. That's not how it really works. Or Paul could have said that. So to me, it's essential. My view, this is my view, not the board's view. My view is, if we are going to do something, it's essential for me to get the right persons that do this stuff every day. here to answer those questions. So if the rest of the board feels that way, it's great. If the majority of the board doesn't feel that way and they're okay with this, I'm okay too, because it goes to the majority of that, sure. So if the rest of the board feels that we need a little bit more information and we are all on the same page, works for me.
So I'm going to kind of echo what Trustee Herrera is saying. Typically, in our meetings, when something is presented to us from the village manager, you know, she's the head of the village, right? So now
No. That's an inaccurate statement, but continue.
Administratively, not.
Yes, thank you, Omar. Thank you. So for me, I assume, right, and we can tell through our email threads that things have been vetted and there's been conversation. Now, if we want to comment on, you know, this parking as far as, alternate parking, that is one thing. But to sit up there and say, hey, I want to hear from the department head. I want to hear from, it's just an odd situation. One is a direct report. The other one is a report to us. So I understand your sentiments, Trustee Herrera.
It's pretty clear.
After tonight's discussion, you have an idea of what you want to propose to move forward with. That's not what was included in this email. That's not what was commented on in this email. Please put into writing what is the proposal, send it to us, and we will read feedback from those department heads. Rika's not comfortable with just being an email thread, but right now nobody has anything to react to because we've had a conversation now and clarified what we want it to be. We want it to be snow emergency streets. We want it to be alternate side of the street parking. I'm not clear on exactly what the spots are in Central Avenue. I'll go take a walk over there. So that's what we're talking about. Put it in writing for us to be able to respond to. Right now.
Too. Okay. All right, moving on. Cabaret licenses. We have 2 of them.
Okay, everybody. First is Maliki Turkish Cuisine. This board actually approved the 2018 license back only a couple of months ago.
Yeah, I know. I
But this
feel like
but this
It's
Deja
is
near
vu.
the end of
deja vu
It's
here.
near the very end of last year. So this is their 2019. It was again vetted by both building department and by the police department. The last license, they were given permission on Friday and Saturday nights from 7 p.m. till midnight. Recorded music with a solo belly dancer. That is the same as that they want this time. And if it's okay with the board, we can have a resolution prepared for next Wednesday's legislative meeting.
So when I saw this, it's just because they came at the end of the year and now that's the only thing that's happened here.
That's the only change.
Okay.
And the other one we have, which just came in today with approvals from police and building, is for the boathouse. They were granted a license last year. Last year they were granted 7 days a week, band and DJ music from noon until 2 a.m., which is pretty much been the standard time for most of the locations. And as I said, they were vetted both by building and police, and they passed. So I would again ask to present a resolution to the board next week to get the cabaret license for the boathouse.
Stuart, did they have to resubmit everything that they submitted last year?
Yeah, which is something
Even
the
though
mayor
we had it
talked to
all.
me about in terms of streamlining it. The cabaret license application, Trustee Herrera would require that they have to put in the license. They need a letter from the owner of the property. If it's not them giving permission to submit, they have to resubmit the application. But, there may be a way that it can be somewhat short-circuited, particularly if it's essentially the same application. The only difference in some of these cases is the liquor license dates
Yeah.
change. But it is essentially the same thing. I should point out that in the case of Maliki, they'll be coming back, not at the next session, but I think shortly after. They also put in for a sidewalk cafe, which will come before this board because they're going to be within 4 feet of various, village planters
well or
and
whatever,
things like
yeah.
that.
That's anyone downtown.
Which they
Yeah.
got, that's right. But in answer to your question, in the case of the boathouse, if you were to look at their 2018 application and their 2019, they're essentially mirror images.
So yeah, my email to it was Stuart and Debbie was also included in my email, which was 2 things. It's now March. I would imagine that these folks have likely as many businesses may have been operating cabarets since January 1st without an active license. We have a number of village licenses that are issued on a calendar year. And Debbie, this part of the question is to you. We have some new software, or we're going to be getting some new software. It would be, I think we would probably have much greater compliance, and we would be able to, our staff would be able to manage much better the applications if in September or October there was a reminder sent out to anybody who has any kind of a license or a permit that's issued by the village, whether that's refreshment, coin op, cabaret, whatever it is. If those are all January 1st renewal dates, they should be starting in September. And if we remind them, preferably by email, because that's inexpensive and much more much easier for our staff to be able to make happen quickly, then we probably have greater compliance, and we would be doing all of our approvals in November or December for January 1st, us and the building department. For us it's just cabaret. For the others it's primarily the building department that has to manage all of these inspections. And then the other part is what Trustee Herrera was talking about, which is the fact when it's really just a renewal and almost nothing on the application is changing, can't we have a streamlined application? Because we want people to be in compliance, and we want to make sure we have all the information, but is it
No, because we charge a fee for administrative purposes to process your application. So if, let's say, I know that we require floor plan and we require, Stuart, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be confusing licenses. We require, is it a CO, or is it, we require a couple of stuff that the building department would already have?
You have to, well, correct, but for example, the one thing that would be new each year is the building department will do a new fire inspection every year.
Okay.
But they're good. Obviously, the building's going to have a CO. That's going to be on file. But what you get is the police check to see if there's been any prior issues. Fire inspection is new each year. That's something that's done. As the mayor points out, that inspection process, virtually every license that's issued requires something to be done by the building department in terms of checking on what goes on. But the basic application is, if you were to look from one year to the next, it's the same thing. Maybe once in a while a principle changes, but what they're asking for in times and things like that, it's pretty much all the same thing.
Right now, everybody starts from scratch every year, though. And so a renewal could in some way be simpler. Even if it requires our staff to go out, it could be simpler on the part of the
Has
applicant.
anything changed in the past year?
Right. Provide us with your updated
Something,
with
I don't
license
know.
or whatever it is. Yeah. So we're bringing it up because we're going to bring it up every single time it appears before us.
What we've done is, for example, we have a number of places at Arcadian that get refreshment licenses. Erstad Biddle was completely unaware of that, and so we've worked with them now. They will, what my office now effectively says to them, we need a letter from you as owner approving that Subway wants to get a refreshment license. So the letter comes directly now from Erstad Biddle, so that the tenant is not even, because the tenant sometimes has difficulty getting, I can get in touch with Erstad Biddle, it seems easier than the tenant can. So we just communicate with them directly because we have a number of businesses there, Starbucks, for example, all those places. We write to them, and Erstad provides that to us. But that's one thing for our regs now require that every year we have to get a new letter from the owner. And many times the tenant will say, well, I gave you a letter last year. I mean, nothing's changed, as you just said. So that's something to think about.
It is a little bit of a headache, I think, for the
I'm sure.
tenants and the owners to have to do that every year.
I'm
They obviously
stressed out.
still want the building, the business to operate because they're still leasing it to them. So, okay.
But the responsibility is with whom? It's a service on our part to remind. It's their responsibility to do. Is that right?
They have to get the application.
We haven't been doing any reminders.
Are we obligated to?
No, we are not. But we would probably get greater compliance, and people would probably pay their fees and go through the process.
I can tell you this, that in the case,
Yeah, I have no doubt that we want to be courteous. That wasn't the question.
I can tell you that in the case of the refreshment license,
Yeah.
My paralegal did send out reminders, and they got a flood of those applications in within a couple of days. So, so it just, I think you got to boost them a little bit to get them to do it. 'Cause- And there is a question about that literally having everything start on a January 1st calendar year is also problematic, not only for the building department, it's from the clerk's end, because that's also when they have all the parking, train station parking. So that may be something also to look at in terms of staggering those, in terms of how they
Great.
work out.
Well, not necessarily staggering actually, but when people have to do the same thing every year, they become aware of it. Even a new business at least knows. So staggering doesn't help. Like the Arcadian, if what helps is to say like there are certain things that happen in the first of the year, and possibly let's say right after Labor Day, certain things occur. Like people have permits as commuters. The first year is complicated, but after that they know, it's coming towards that time of the year. I probably have to do this. I have to do that. And so, we might just want to make it a different date than the first of the year this is the small business time to look at things for everything involved with businesses, whether it's these issues, the cabaret, everything together so that there's like sort of a Labor Day would be like an interesting choice of of view. So, and therefore send out one sweeping letter, like a checklist. This is what you have to do. And I know this is work. It's just a suggestion. I'm sure there are other ways of approaching this.
So given the amount of time that we've just discussed, something that is that is a procedural, something that should be improved in a procedural perspective, I hope that we will actually try and figure that out, because that's it's not our job to try and figure it out, but we hear the concerns and we are bringing them to you all to.
I appreciate the hook.
No, we've all contributed to this on this side of the
Drinking my
table.
tea, shutting up.
To conclude it though, reaching out to the clerk's office, since they play a huge role, not when it comes to staff time, strategic planning, about if they are really busy and staff is really involved in other projects in January, we want to have a discussion now because we want to encourage people to apply and be compliant, and so how can we work with you, or how can your office work with us to start making some changes or plan differently and on possibly how their office may consider operating our licenses. That's all.
Okay. Motion to go into executive session for matters of real property and collective bargaining
Possibly personnel.
and personnel for matters related to specific persons. And
Litigation.
litigation.
It's all right on here.
Oh,
Checking
boy.
everything
The
off
meeting's
on
just
the-
getting started. Do we have a motion?
So much
move.
fun.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And with that, thank you very much for joining us. Please join us next week, April 3rd, at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility for our regular meeting. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.